Future of libraries, wildest dreams. 2. How as libraries do we relate to the uncomfortable uncertainty of the future, the near future, the bit further away future? Do we ride the trends? Do we just follow the horses? Or do we steer and design and take an influence on what our future will look like? In a series of conversations with great library minds, I will look for answers and basically for more interesting questions to think about in the future. And I will take you along on this ride, and let's see what we can find out. Enjoy.
My name is Lidewij Edelkoort. I'm born in the Netherlands, but live in Paris. And my profession for all my life has been the profession of forecasting the future. This is also the reason why I've been making a book with Charlotte, because as in my profession of forecaster, I can forecast any other domain, whether it's beauty or car or food. And of course, also trends are working on the idea of libraries and their future, because they are so in the middle of society. And we come with the notion that that will be even more so in the future. So it's the anchor, I would say, of smaller cities, especially. And we are super happy that we've been doing this work. We were asked by the Royal Library to do this. And it's a gift to all the libraries, big and small, in the Netherlands. And it was very well received because it gives many, many ideas for the future.
This could not be a more timely conversation. We're right in the middle of launching a new piece of work, which is called Come Rain or Shine, Preparing Libraries for the Future in an Age of Change, and forecasting is exactly where we're at. Why is it important? I remember when I first started in this job, a policymaker took me to one side and he said, you don't have a library problem, you've got a leadership problem. And he said, you know, libraries are essential, they're absolutely loved. The question is, do you have the skills within your community to see what's happening in society, see the changes that are coming down the line, and configure libraries for the best chance of success? Are you agile in responding to change? And that's been the fundamental question throughout, you know, is how much energy do we want to burn up protecting what we once had versus how much energy do we deploy on building the new? So I think this is a totally essential conversation.
There isn't one size fits all for these trends, you know, especially in libraries. You know, there's so many different types of libraries and different communities and diverse communities that they're serving that we have to really think carefully about the way that we apply those trends. But I think, you know, at a very highest level, I think that what we have to do is to continue to remain agile, adaptive, and innovative. None of us could have predicted the pandemic that hit us. So the best laid plans that we had put in place were not possible for us to execute. We had to pivot. We had to look for other ways to move forward. And we can anticipate that, you know, really the only thing we can anticipate is that there'll be more change. And so we need to, you know, flex our change muscles, and we need to get really good about being adaptable and, you know, and using both the best forecasting that we can do, but at the same time, you know, not being so locked into those future plans that we can't change them as we need to be able to do that.
These days, a lot is going on in the United States, which pulls my attention here. So I'm going to say that the three trends that I see going on right now, which I think have international connections, but are definitely in the US. One is around book banning and the results of that, which I think is actually a positive side, believe it or not. Artificial intelligence, because of course. And then one, which I think is really powerful, is called the deaths of despair. So if you look at these three things, you might say this is not a positive outlook where Skynet is going to help us with deaths of despair to ban books. But actually, I look at that in really interesting and potentially positive ways if librarians take the reins of those horses and push them forward.
I think it's always really important to look forward. And like, obviously it is always great to evaluate, sort of, and look at what you can improve. But I think it's really important to look at what's affecting your communities. I think for public libraries, it is about what is happening locally in your nation, in your neighborhood, sort of right down to your community around your library. So it is really important to respond. So if we want to be relevant, we have to actually know that. But I think if you're leading a library service, you need to actually understand where you're headed and what's going to come at you. And that's why you should be really across things. So in Australia, the CSIRO is a Commonwealth science a group, and they've published what are the trends that are going to face Australia. So then you look at that and go, wow, is that going to face Australia? What does it mean for libraries then? And so that's the kind of evaluation that you need to keep your eye on. You can't just be in the task and in the moment.
I think it's very important to keep yourself out there. And it sounds like cliche, but you have to put yourself outside libraries in order to be useful to libraries. So I think that means looking at trends, but also getting yourself plugged into projects that may have nothing to do with libraries, or you think have nothing to do with libraries. Yeah, so for myself, I'm plugging myself into several international projects in Singapore. So there's a major digital tech project, and I'm running one of the threads in that one. It's a national project to envision what Singapore as a digital nation will be in the future. Yeah, and it's called Smart Nation. And my job in that one is to look at the heart and soul of digital. Yeah, so I think it's important to put yourself into all these areas. And I'm not so sure about trends, Erik. I believe in conversations. And from conversations, because I'm a humanities student, so I may not be as good at figures, but I'm good at conversations.
So what we've seen is that we've modeled it against 4 scenarios, basically. Yeah. We've said you can pretty much see a steady state, things stay as they are, that you see the kind of conflict between progress and kind of territorialism kind of emerging. Or you say, well, things could really get worse. Things could, we could fail to address climate. We could see an acceleration of conflict. We could see the kind of truth decay continuing to kind of attack public life. Or you could see a chaotic environment where all of these things are true. There's some good, there's some bad, you don't know how things are going to pan out. Or you see a kind of blue skies utopia where you say, well, okay, we address climate change, we address misinformation and disinformation, we address skills. And I think the reality that we've discovered is not that there's any one of those scenarios that we're heading towards, but that we're always going to be moving through any number of them. Yeah. And so the real skill that we're saying is we need to get much better at seeing which way the weather is going and then dressing accordingly.
The biggest challenges that I see for libraries in the future are specifically around the increase in book bans and intellectual freedom challenges that are really threatening our information literacy, our right to access information. And also the other challenge I see is the issue around information and digital literacy skills and helping us to sort out what's fake, what's real, what's, how do we move forward in a democratic society. These skills are super important. So I see these 2 challenges as some of the biggest challenges going forward.
Well, one of the key things for us is we lead the community in socializing the activities that they may need to do and to point out the benefits to them personally to pump up your tires. If you pump up your tires, you use less fuel. So, if you use less fuel, hey, it's great on your family budget. So there's a whole lot of things that you can actually socialize around climate change to change the activities and the actions of the community around you.
So I think the trend of this is what we've seen already in 2 years was attack, not prepared, improve our narratives. Now we have a better narratives, we have a better connection to our communities understand it, and it's up to us to make sure that it's a trend moving forward over the next 10 years, that how do we build on this new sense of trust and understanding about intellectual freedom, the importance of it, how do we use that to build policy, things like school librarianship, where we can be teaching about mis and disinformation. How do we do this in government legislation and regulation so that we can talk about making sure that information access for all? So to me, the book banning trend isn't towards book banning. It's using it as a starting point towards greater understanding about the need for intellectual freedom and the protections of it.
The key thing for all librarians is to have a core set of values and understand what those values are so that they can make those strategic decisions that abide by our values.
Technology is great and has really allowed us to establish these global communities. Look at us today having this interview across continents. It's amazing. But and so it's fueled that ability for us to stay connected. But those personal connections and those personal conversations and relationships we've seen that is so important. And the pandemic really raised the significance of that. As we were isolating, we realized how much we lost in terms of those engaging in a personal face-to-face kind of way. So I think libraries can provide us that third space and provide changing and adaptive services that will allow us to come together and also have some of those kind of difficult conversations that we were talking about earlier, to have that discourse that we were discussing.
Over the past year, we've seen the emergence of AI in the form of generative AI. And when I use the word emergence, I don't mean it suddenly started. I mean, we've sort of, once again, begun to recognize it. AI and what generative AI, ChatGPT and DALL-E and all these other things have shown us is how much AI can do. And what we now need for people to realize is how much AI is doing already. It's not coming. It's been here for a while. It's influencing search results and music results and using it for tutoring services. And we know it's used for employment, and we know that it's used for lots of different reasons. And so I think this is something where libraries, where we've seen major technological changes in the past, libraries have always seen threats and then found accommodations. And I think what's neat about AI is we're sort of seeing the opposite, where we started with, hey, this is what we could use it for, in a general positive view. And that goes from, pardon me, everywhere from using it to have people be able to tell their stories better. When you go in and you go, well, I don't really know how to generate images. Well, guess what? If you can write, you can do it. I don't know how to write well. Good news. If you can get ideas, this is how you can begin to learn writing. And that's going to turn into being able to create new stories and storytelling that people who often not had access to these kinds of tools suddenly have access. And the libraries can be helping them to do that, and also at the same time be talking about ethics, be talking about use. And we're seeing this is a way to change relationships with some of our oldest partners, such as publishers, because where librarians have not seen existential threats in AI, publishers absolutely have. And so talking about making that transition from we have the stuff and we're gatekeepers over to how do we build communities and connect communities and tell stories and all these kinds of things in open access, et cetera, and open educational resources. This is a chance for us to not only redefine that relationship, but frankly, help out other partners who are under threat.
The whole rise of all government services moving to there's a whole range of people in the next 10 years who are missing out. In 20 or 30 years, that might not be as true. But now, the next 10 years, there's a whole heap of people who do not use a computer in their job, and that are cleaners. There's a whole still lot of industries where you don't use a computer. They don't know how to use government services online. They don't know how they can not be scammed. So all of that will be really important. And for me, the other one is the importance of reading deeply. I really do worry about the components that we now skim. We skim online. We don't read deeply. Our long form reading, our attention spans, are not as strong, and that means that we're really susceptible to misinformation and disinformation because we're clickbait. Sort of
True.
we love clickbait, we love clicking. So, sort of I do think that critical reading, that aspect of critical comprehension is really important. And public libraries and school libraries have a really important role in establishing that love of reading, love of story. And yes, listening to an audiobook is reading. Sort of love of story and that empathy building capacity to put yourself in somebody else's shoes is a really important thing to do for young people.
So you said the first age of libraries is the acquisition age. That's the age where you collect as much as possible. The second age of library is the access age. You try and provide access to what you require. The third age of libraries, you say, is almost like the maker age, where you make stuff, you have tools to make stuff. And a lot of libraries around the world have the maker studios and stuff like that. And he stopped there. I'm not trying to one-up him, but I feel that we have entered the fourth age of libraries. And this fourth age is the generative age. So what does it mean to be a generative library? So for me, a generative library, yes, it taps on generative AI, but it is a little bit more than that. How do you create conditions, create tools, and using technology to help people to create content and assets that goes back to the library and then becomes something that can be discovered by other people? So it becomes like a little cycle of sorts. So besides the collection of published materials or, content assets that we know of, databases and all that, what if one day the bulk of library is made out of things that you created because the library actually gave you that platform, the technology, people to help you to do that?
So what I think we are always really, really kind of excited about, and where there's a huge opportunity, is not to kind of problematize new tech, is not to say, oh no, that's terrible, it's going to destroy everything, is to engage with it critically, understand its strengths and weaknesses, get good at it, and then empower the information user to make use of it in a way that's kind of productive. So where I think we would really fail as a profession is if we surrendered information and information supply to AI. Where I think we will really win is if we get really good at harnessing the capabilities of AI to the needs of information users. And there was an amazing talk here just before Christmas by a colleague at JISC, organization that works with higher education. And she said, you're not going to lose your job to AI. You're going to lose your job to the person who's better than you at using AI. And so I think that's the imperative as a profession, is we have to get good at this.
Technology will have an impact because AI will manipulate society into losing lots of jobs. So there will be a tremendous amount of people in the next 10 to 15 years which are losing their white-collar jobs this time. And this means that there will be many babies born for no reason at all, because there's no work. And for now, our reason of being has always been, work, to make our own character and to somehow make your life. Work was a very big part of it. And so we will have to reinvent completely society, completely rethink how to educate, how to stimulate, how to learn. Why learning if you don't need to learn? So learning should be very different. And in this case, we think that the technology will put the library in the middle of society, because it will become much more than a library. It will become a place where people come and hang out and learn and teach and exchange and do craft and enrich themselves. So there is a sort of calling for the library of the future to be this, like a new school, in the sense of making school.
That was what I was thinking. For me, the libraries will also be talking about with people about the new meaning in life. They will help develop people and help them with their new well-being and their new meaning in life.
Actually, the library in Singapore is embarking on what we call the generator concept. So we're building about 7 or 8 generators to generate different things using the library's content, using the ingenuity of our users, of creators, and then creating new products out of that. I can talk a little bit more about that if you like, but
please do.
the idea is to create all of these generators. So you can generate stories, can generate lives, you can generate answers, and all the products that are generated together will create what we call the generative library.
In 1997, that software to build a website, to construct a website, was open to all. If you had a computer, and once again, that was a level of privilege, but a relatively low level of privilege in many countries, you could be a producer on the internet.
Yeah.
That's not the case with AI. The AI is expensive, it's huge investments, etc. And what we have to realize is the same people who are putting together these AI systems and helping to set this policy are the same ones that grew up around social media, and where we saw communication and communion replaced with conflict for greater engagement. These are the same players. And so if we don't, as a library, look at and become part of this conversation, we are potentially looking at AI to increase the amount of isolation of individuals, the ability to create really compelling individual media and accounts and engagement and games and be amongst ourselves. And what we have seen in the US, though it is quickly spreading to the UK, we're seeing this experience, is that isolation is actually a determinant of longevity. That we now have data that shows the more isolated individuals, isolation is equivalent to smoking 12 cigarettes a day. Isolation is a part of what has led to what's called the deaths of despair. That is, we've seen with people who are isolated, people without college degrees, a growing sense of disconnectedness from government, disconnected from community, isolation, and we've seen an increase in mortality and a decrease in life. This has been phrased as the deaths of despair. We have seen the first recognition of it was in white males in their middle ages. Suddenly we were seeing deaths increase by suicide, deaths increase by disease related to alcoholism and drug overdosing.
You know, that we've got the computer entertainment show going on in Las Vegas today, this week, as we speak. They are showcasing some of the most brilliant innovations. But what isn't there is the deep knowledge of the librarian and then bringing that to the very human needs of the user. So I'm really hoping we get better and faster at embracing tech. So I think we need to find a way for libraries to become listening and learning organizations, and for leadership to recognize that the real strength of leadership isn't dictating terms, it's enabling change. It's kind of empowering people to help drive change. The other thing I would say is, you know, we and this may be a UK thing, but I see it in other constituencies, maybe need to spend less time looking inward at libraries. You know, what are libraries? What are the differences? The definition wars that rage around different kinds of library. And actually spend more time looking at the partners out there that are trying to build social change. And I think you mentioned the Sustainable Development Goals. I think they're a great way for us to go out to the world and say, okay, who else cares about information poverty, gender inequality, scarcity of resources, and who can we work with to make that change happen?
We need to be facilitators. So we're not experts. So it's not about telling people the right answer. It's facilitating people to be on their learning journey. So it's being a guide, you know, sort of. So it is actually being a guide, but also being the person, the host, you know, sort of in your home, who introduces, oh, Erik, you love coding. You might want to meet Jane. She loves coding too, you know, sort of, and to get together around that. But the other thing I think that libraries can do is to be that dabbling place, the maker spaces, and, you know, sort of the creativity that you can explore, you can also on sell. So if you're making something, that might be your side hustle. So you can explore your side hustle in a library. And I think there'll be a lot of side hustles. I know that technology will take a lot of jobs, you know, sort of, and a lot of repetitive jobs, but what they don't take is the creativity and the wanting of people to make. Now, whether that's crochet, whether that's jewelry, whether that's woodwork, whether it's, you know, sort of whatever it is, you know, sort of libraries can be the place to explore, you know, sort of that new talent that you might be. It might be writing, you know, sort of it might be whatever that new talent is, that you can explore it by yourself, surrounded by a community, which makes you feel safe.
Everyone has expertise and mastery in something, even if it's only their own lived experience. And what we're seeing is a shift in tools to allow people to spend less time on certain expertise to focus on their personal area of expertise. Examples. We're seeing an increasing number in the higher education sector that I'm part of. We're seeing an increasing number of programs launching around artificial intelligence, but they're not launching in computer science programs. They're launching in psychology programs. They're launching in the humanities, because the tools, you know, ChatGPT, we talk about, it can write an essay and should it, but you know what it can write really well? JavaScript code and software and Python code. And it's increasingly being able to, if you want to create your own AI search engine, you roll your own, you don't get in there and program it, you talk to it. This is what I want you to do. These are the kinds of, right? We know that, for example, an image generation of AI, and I'm sorry to spend a lot of time on AI, but to me, it's an exemplar. It's not going to create a beautiful image out of these AI-based systems is based on your fluency and ability to communicate in writing. You have to become a better writer to produce better images.
This is a very dynamic new job, and several jobs actually, which are more close, I would say, to curating. So it's curating events, it's curating collections, it's curating presentations, it's curating the whole year with events and so on. So it's a lot of, it's more close to museums, theaters almost. And therefore, I think that the jobs are becoming more creative. Not all of them, but a part of the jobs are becoming more creative, more challenging, more exciting also, as far as I can see. And then the real bookworms, you know, will stay the bookworms and make us aware of what is all the value of these books and how we could read from these books and how we could perform from these books and how we should use the books. So there's the two roles, actually, like the real scientific approach, academic approach, and then there is the cultural approach almost.
Yeah, it's almost like the new influencer.
Okay.
They have their own inspiration, they have the knowledge of the books, and they will share their personal story and give and advise you this book because it fits you.
So I think that I do see a role for libraries in helping to curate you know, higher quality content. That's not to say that they're restricting the other content, but I think that, you know, I don't know about you, but, you know, sometimes you look for things and there's like a lot of different answers. And how do you decide which one of those answers is the most accurate or the most helpful or what? I do think libraries, even in this age, have a very strong, and maybe especially in this age, have a very strong role to play.
The role of the librarian is to, you know, to collect, you know, and then to organize and to do all that. We're both the keeper and, I would like to say, the connector. Yeah, so the connecting role is very important. So the librarians working on this are the ones who figure out what to put into the data set. So in all Gen AI, the key is what is in your data set. Yes. So how is Gen AI going to pick from that to generate? So for us, we have started with a very strange idea, which is instead of taking the data set of the entire internet and all that, we have created our own data set. So the selection of what goes in the data set, the verification of that is extremely important. So librarians do that. Then the librarians also are out there collecting content that they can put back into this data set. So they are seeking stories and content from people to put in to enrich this data set. So it's not just official published content, but it's also informal social content. So from this data set, then the librarians will work with technologists and all that to develop the service. So basically, how do users use this service to create new stories or new products? And then thereafter, they will look at these new products and then put that back in the data set. So it's really like building a new kind of library. You know, the sequence is the same, the librarian's role is the same, but it is just a completely different format, and it's a dynamic format.
So if you look at trends in librarianship, we have a beautiful library about 40 minutes north of us in Georgetown, Texas. The major population center of Georgetown, Texas, or demographic, are retirees because it is a large retirement community. Their services, how they lay them out, what they do at a distance, what kind of programming are all driven around serving this different population. So we see these, once again, looking like your community. If your community has a large elder community, a large retiree community, you're going to shape your services based on that. And so that needs expertise. In other words, the shaping requires specialties, requires experience, requires principles, requires instruction. To me, makes the role of the librarian and the professional librarian even more vital now.
You know, I think this is an evolving area. Obviously, that and the whole generative AI exploded within just the last 12 months. Yeah. And so it's definitely evolving. But I do know that, like at San Jose State School of Information, that we've historically stayed very on top of the curriculum trends and made sure that students have the kinds of skills that they need. And I wouldn't be surprised if that's already you know, being addressed or being planned for in the curriculum. But already I think that we're seeing that I think that our field is well positioned for that kind of a role in terms of, you know, even drawing back to the reference interview questions that we've asked of the past. You know, we know how to ask questions and to draw out responses. I think we've been trained about how to do that kind of questioning and prompting throughout our, you know, as a basis, foundational skill in our field. And I think, you know, we can build upon that and to do that prompt engineering for generative AI. So I don't see that as a far stretch. It is a skill, but I think it's certainly one that can be adapted.
So for the library skills, you know, sort of the future, I really do think that what librarians and, you know, sort of library technicians, all of the library professions, they need to have a love of learning. Yeah. They also need to have a love of trying and failing and then learning, you know, sort of to do it again. So it is about that we are no longer the expert. We're going to learn it with you. So let's learn it with you. You come with a piece of technology, you come with something else, that you're given time within your job, and that's the important thing too, within your job, to actually test and try and learn.
And so in the book, we give lots of ideas, but then also, because it's maybe too much sometimes, you know, it's far into the future, we give advice on the day-to-day managing of what is the library now. Also give small ideas of what you can implement right away. And that is even sometimes already quite avant-gardist, you know, that the library would become much more like maybe even gastronomic field, that the collections will become more thematic, that we will have a more home interior versus a very studious interior. A lot of the ideas we are lending from new libraries in the world, like book stores, because bookstores have seen an enormous success, especially in Japan, but also in the United States, where people hang out in the bookstore, they work in the bookstore, they flirt in the bookstore, they meet in the bookstore, they study, they rework. So we think that we can learn a lot by observing actually what is happening in bookstores.
The idea of the library as empowering people to create content, to tell their story, to kind of be part, is so fundamentally in tune with our mission, right? I mean, that should be enabling everybody to participate freely in the cultural life of their community. I mean, that's fundamental and in the Declaration of Human Rights. But then there's quality, and you can't engineer quality out of a system. And so I think what's really interesting is that all of the old signifiers of trust and quality have been disrupted. So it's no longer about how big is my building, how many books, who has the right to be literate. Do publishers have the sole right to dictate what looks like a good and trustworthy piece of content? So in a way, our capability to create content has outstripped our building of new signifiers of trust and quality. And so that's what I would love to see libraries move across into taking a role as publishers, as kind of data stewards, because for too long libraries have been separated from the creative process by the intermediaries, by the publishers. I think actually in a disrupted age, you could see the library emerge as the new bastion of trust and kind of accountability. So I think you could have a new kind of social contract in which people create content in and with the library, but the library also has a kind of qualitative role to play in filtering that and making sure that they're providing truth to others.
We're seeing those kinds of changes already for libraries, and they've been moving in those directions for a long time. I mean, in the US, and I know other places around the world, there's been the growth of the whole maker movement and providing spaces for people in libraries to create and to innovate and to come together and to work in those kinds of ways and the co-creation. We've seen the changes in library spaces to be less potentially about physical collections and more about that coming together. In academic libraries, thinking about innovation spaces in the library, or information centers for students to come together. So we're seeing all those kinds of changes already in terms of providing that third space.
All of this content that is generated, you don't just see it on your phone. So I like to think of the experience of the library that comes in different sizes. So it's like t-shirt sizes, S, M, L, it's a little bit Rancool House, but it's the idea of different sizes. So at the smaller size, the experience of this content that's created can be just on your phone or on your computer. So it's a very personal thing. But we also feel that a lot of the content that's created, so for instance, if you generate, say, the life of your grandma who has passed away but left a journal, but using the librarian's resources and using the Gen AI, you could generate almost like a history of your grandmother.
Yes.
That can actually be enjoyed as a group. So the physical library will have a facility for you to enjoy seeing it as a family and even with your friends, and then on the spot to make the adjustments that you need to make it even better.
We need to recognize is that as we move forward, libraries are going to look more and more like their local communities. Physically, kinds of collections they build, the kind of services they offer, all of those are going to look more and more like where they are. And that allows them to build this community and connect their community.
So the physical experience and the social experience of what technology has created is extremely important to the library. Yeah, so I think that's the physical space. So Lab 25 envisions the new library space to be still physical, but with digital elements. And sometimes you need to be physically there to make adjustments to the digital elements.
Yes.
The building could be anywhere. It could also be like a holiday library.
Hotel.
When you go to a certain place, which is very mystique, and all the books that are in that small library are fitting of connecting with the environment and the place where it is.
But it will be so attractive that you will be inviting people then to come into the premises, or to come into the boat, or come into the tent, or come on travel, come on the trail. So it could be even a library which is actually a travel library which takes you on the road.
What do you as a librarian, what do you share with the architect around, sort of greening the building and acting more greenly as you do your operations? So those are key things for us, is climate change. The other one that really struck me was health.
Yeah.
So there is going to be a crisis in health we have obesity, we have, sort of all of the issues and the issues around climate change, and we have pandemics. So, sort of what are those key things around health and mental health as well? And so in Australia, we've done the Libraries for Health and Wellbeing research, and, and really promoting the health aspects and the mental health aspects of reading, of engaging in libraries, and that social component of libraries when you come in and meet new people.
I've never met a librarian that didn't fundamentally oppose censorship. And then I've never met a librarian that didn't also engage in it in some way. And the thing that I find totally fascinating about librarianship is it is practical applied ethics. It's ethics in the real world. And so you've got to have a compass. You've got to have a set of professional values that guide you. And you've got to have a fundamental belief in the rights of the person, the reader, the individual user. And then you've got to be pragmatic about how you make some of those choices. So we've just published some guidance around censorship and intellectual freedom that says, we have to oppose censorship in all its forms unless we're required by law. And some of that law is around safeguarding children, for example. So I don't think it is too much to say libraries have to have a moral or at least an ethical compass. But I really like that we're able to deploy that pragmatism that says, how do we do this without doing harm? How do we have that dialogue?
It's the T-shaped element factor algorithm. So we have a project that's called being an informed society. That's one of the tracks of Lab 25. And it's to get people to step outside their point of view, to appreciate other points of view. So those points of view, Erik, we will curate.
Yes.
Yeah? So we throw every point of view and let people decide, because that honestly sometimes is pandemonium and there are a lot of bad actors out there. But we'll create, instead of one, which might be a moral compass, we'll create 6. So there are projects that we're doing that is the name is like a learning superstore. So when you go into search for something, in social media, they will drive you deeper and deeper into a rabbit hole. Yeah. But in this case, we break it open. So instead of just one point of view or one type of resource, we might share with you 3 or 4 other things that gives you different points of view. So that's why so besides going deeper, we also go broader. So in terms of even something as simple as searching for what you want, that's one. Then in terms of the way that we do our programs, we have a program called Read to Be Sure, where we engage on difficult topics like, greenwashing, sustainability, gender equality, and we have topics like Gen AI and stuff like that, or even fashion, fast fashion. Yeah, so people will go, oh, fast fashion is bad, because it's not sustainable. But there are other points of view about how fast fashion democratizes fashion. So we get a bunch of you to talk about this, and then we share all those points of view. You're comfortable to share that, and we have a debate among school students to then debate these issues. I guess it's not so much a library as a place where you are the moral compass, but a library as a place where you're comfortable to appreciate debate.
I do think that libraries have historically and particularly now are gravitating toward living their values, trying to find that right pathway forward for reflecting those values of access to everyone, that neutrality as you talked about, but at the same time being reflective of the communities that they're serving. And so if you're serving a community that's, has a different point of view about how information should be accessed or what's appropriate content, how do you navigate that with, balancing the needs of the more minoritized points of view or users in your community? So I think that this is one of the big challenges that we will continue to face and will, likely be still dealing with in 2020 and 2035 as well, because there is no easy path forward for this. And this gets back to where I was talking a little bit about some of the context is important, and really understanding and being connected with the community that you're serving, but still making sure to meet those minoritized perspectives as well. There's no easy answer to this question.
Whatever kind of library you are for people. So the learning, the social, sort of, and the reading and the access to resources is secondary to the fact that you are there for everyone, and you have to make a space that is welcoming and tolerant of everyone. So to do that, sometimes you might have to stand up.
Yeah.
And, so, sort of the freedom to read, we know that in America, sort of in a lot of Western countries, the challenge, to the freedom to read is really high, sort of, and heightened. They're called the culture wars. Yeah. It's a war. They see it as they're soldiers for Christian soldiers. They see us as the enemy, librarians, and those, academics and education's enemy, sort of. So it's really important that we maintain that line, that people have the right to read. But to do that, we also need to bring different types of people together. So, and to have those conversations. And I know libraries do human libraries where you can, sort of loan sort of a drag queen. You can take out an LGBTQI person and hear them. You can listen to a Muslim person or a Christian person, sort of, so that you can actually know that these people are human. They're not other. They're not an other. They're not an alien. You can actually speak to a Jewish person and a Palestinian.
Yeah.
Sort of that we need to bring them together, not, sort of not take a position that those people can't come in.
One of my contributors is Rebecca Smith Aldrich, and she's an expert in that area and has done some really important work. And she does talk about that and the important roles that, for example, that libraries play as, a safe harbor, and for helping to address climate change, but also providing that safe haven for their communities. And she also talks which I think is interesting, in an important way, about how libraries are also sustaining the human spirit, through, and she's, directly, through kindness and understanding and respect and empathy. And so I think that, this sustainable development goals are really important. And I do see that directly surfaced in the book, and specifically around this whole area of sustainability, which I think libraries have a really critical role to play.
And an environment that is kind of safe, trusted, accountable, but which fundamentally promotes agency, which encourages the person to go and pursue their own curiosity. I think, again, what we're seeing with the big tech platforms is that they ask you to surrender agency in the name of ease of use. It's like, well, I'm just going to feed you an endless doom scroll of content. That actually isn't educative. It's not improving. It's not taking you anywhere. It's just scratching an itch. And I think we really have to guard against being drawn into just scratching the itch for people. I think we have to help recognize that there is a journey of self-directed learning, self-discovery, and that's what we're empowering people to go on.
How do we facilitate democracy where you can talk to people about their opinion? Now, Erik, you may disagree with me on something, but it's okay, I still like you. So it's okay to have opposing opinions, but it's not okay to say you're wrong, I'm right.
I think with the growing role of the library, people will flock to it more easily. The good thing of a library versus a museum and a theater is that it has an open door. It's an open door policy. It's not expensive, or sometimes it's free. You can hang out the whole day and be safe and be warm and be together. So there's a lot of aspects of the environment as such, which is already hospitality in a way. And from the day that we're going to enlarge the hospitality angle with good coffee instead of, a barista instead of tea, then people will flock, I think, very easily, especially because the amateur in us, which will be challenged more and more, is asking us to find new hobbies and new fields of interest and new fields of making and even performing together and so on. So this will be sort of the center of attraction.
So I think the Library of the Future will have a lot of community partners who come together in the library space, supported by the library, to actually facilitate conversation, facilitate community conversation around climate change. We have quite a lot of people in our communities who don't believe it.
So I think a lot of it is choreography. So I did two national projects before I came back to the library world. So one of them was called the Bicentennial Experience, and it was to look at 700 years of Singapore history created in a different form. In most cases, when you do a national exhibition, you would probably have, artifacts, you have panels, telling people stuff like that. So what I did instead was I worked with theatre practitioners. I worked with people who compose scores for movies, special effects, set designers, and all that. Don't have to go that far, but the whole idea is that we might need to take another medium to bring them in. Yeah. So whether it's using art, using film, or in my case, using theatre, using experience and all that to draw them in. So for me, curiosity is the choreography of the experience.
But democracy needs a literate community. They need an educated community, and they need somebody who will question. It's okay to question government and who believe.
I think I
think there's a real role for libraries around that democracy, around that community conversation. But again, I don't believe that libraries should come out and be Democrat or Labor or Green. Do you know what I mean? Like it is about facilitating those conversations.
Library of your wildest dreams. Well, we've heard from some great friends and some amazing people what their wildest dreams are when we think about libraries. And for me, when I think about Library of the Future and Library Today, I think libraries are about that quality that makes us human. The stories, I think, the ability to keep, to share, and to make stories. If libraries are as inclusive as they can be, and they are safe spaces, and they're safe for everyone, it will be the perfect place to nourish our finest quality, to share and to listen and to care for our dreams and the dreams of the world. I hope you enjoyed all this, and I look forward to seeing you somewhere in the future soon.